first. That's why they're laughing at me.
Okay, we are recording,
Okay,
so we will at least have audio.
okay.
And we have one screen back here for now.
And it was
Thanks,
there,
John.
but then that came up, so you might be able to get it there.
Well, oh, look at that.
We're on our way.
We
How
got
about
two
that?
screens.
And it's the
Yeah.
screen closest to the people that need to see it too, so.
Yeah, it's easier than turning around. Thank you, John. Good job.
Okay, let's,
All right, I'll start over then. Just so everybody knows on the record, this is a work session of the Marquette Township Board with the Marquette County Land Bank, and today is Wednesday, March 6, 2024, and it's just about 7 minutes after 4. Roll call is Linda and Randy are excused and absent, and the rest of the board's here with Manager Kangas. So, Antonio gave an introduction of himself. He's the housing specialist working with the Marquette County Land Bank and actually with the partnership, the LSCP, working on shovel-ready projects in the county. I've had the pleasure of having many meetings with him already. So this all involves the whole housing issue in the county. But today we're going to talk about just information. We're going to learn from Andrew all about the land bank and whatever she wants to share with housing. The director of the LSCP just walked in, Christopher Germain. Do you want to say hi, Christopher, or anything? I don't want to put you on the spot, but Antonio said hi, just so the board kind of knows who you are.
Hi guys, yeah, Christopher Germain, CEO of the Lake Superior Community Partnership. So apologies for being late. I was out trying to solve air service. Didn't solve it, but we're trying.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Okay, Ann, are you starting us off?
Yeah, you'll probably learn more from Jeff than me. But we'll introduce Jeff in a minute. But many of you I've seen before when I've come before the board for different projects. But yeah, today the purpose is just education. This housing TIF of course stands for tax increment financing, but that's a mouthful, so I'll refer to it as TIF a lot today. Housing TIF is brand new. So I'm going to go over some of the background and basics of brownfield, which some of you have heard from me before because you actually have 2 brownfield plans that have been adopted here, and I'll even give you a little bit of an update on those since I'm here. But the housing element of brownfield is brand new, and the legislation just went into play last summer. So we're all, I wanted to say right at the get-go, we're all still learning. Practitioners, consultants, which is Jeff, all of us are still learning about this. So this is kind of like a hot off the press presentation for you, if you will. So again, today I'm hoping to go over some brownfield basics, talk again about the new housing TIF, and just some of the financial issues with creating housing that we're facing today and why this is an issue and why we need tools like this. Leave some time for you for Q&A at the end, and hopefully you'll leave with understanding this new tool a little bit better and some of the challenges that we have. So, first of all, I said brownfield basics, so just again, I know some of you have heard this before, but we'll go through it again. Act 381 is the legislative act that was put in place that really created a lot of these incentives that we're going to be talking about. That goes back to 1996, so it's been around for quite a while. And it's really a way that municipalities can locally control some of the incentives for development within their jurisdiction. So it's a pretty powerful tool that you have that you can access to try to encourage development within your jurisdiction. I like this picture. I don't know who, is that your picture? Okay, it's Jeff's picture. I like that picture because it really gives you a good synopsis of what brownfield is. So you've got that little tiny building on the bottom, right? That's kind of can represent an undeveloped site. And you have a developer that comes along and wants to build that bigger building, right? And so there's going to be a tax increase when you build a bigger building, right? You generate more property tax revenue. We refer to that increase as the tax increment, so that's that red arrow in between the small building and the large building. So when there's that tax increment, that creates an opportunity to capture that increment and support that development project. and support eligible activities that developer might encounter in developing that site. Important thing to remember, and we'll reiterate this a couple of times, that the local unit of government continues to reap the reward of those taxes for that small little building, right? So it's really just giving up that tax increment in order to support that development that's happening on the site. So this Act 381 really was the Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act created this tool for local units of government to be able to use. So again, it provides funding and financing for brownfield eligible activities and allows us to create brownfield plans which allow for this tax increment financing to be able to be used. So those new taxes that are generated from that bigger building can be used to reimburse that developer for eligible expenses. And it's not everything, right? It's just their brownfield eligible expenses. And we can talk about what some of those things are, but they're changing. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, because housing is now an eligible expense and never was before. So that tax increment is based on the investment that developer is making on the site. Plans are limited, okay? So the longest a plan can go is 35 years. So it's not like a DDA. I know you have a DDA here in the township, and DDAs are kind of there forever. Brownfield plans are site specific, okay? They're very specific to that development project, and they only last as long as it takes to reimburse that developer for their eligible expenses. So we've had a couple brownfield plans that this board has, I don't want to say approved, because we're a county brownfield authority. It's actually a county board that approves, but they can't do that until the local unit of government, which is Marquette Township, supports that brownfield plan. And we've had two plans that I've brought to you in the past that have been supported by this board and then ultimately the county board. So the first one is the one on the bottom. That goes back to 2017, and that's Barrel and Beam. Eligible expenses on that project were interior demolition, asbestos abatement, and site assessment activities. So again, not all of their costs for renovating that building were eligible for the brownfield incentive, just those items that I mentioned there. It's expected that the developer will be reimbursed in full by 2026 with another 5 years of capture for the local brownfield fund. That plan, I think I wrote myself a note here because, you know, when we adopt these plans, they're all estimates, and then millages change, and we never know what the tax assessor is going to come along and assess the property at. So we make a lot of guesses at the beginning. It was originally a 13-year plan. Right now, today, we're looking at it being a 14-year plan. So we had a 1-year difference that could change, depending on how assessment values go up and millage rates change. That could change, but so right now we're pretty much still consistent with the original plan that was brought. The other one, the more recent one, was in 2019, and that's the former Senex station, of course, on the corner of Wright Street and US 41. We call it North Crest. That was the name of the developer. And that, the eligible expenses on that site included demolition of the gas station that used to be there, the convenience store, removal of the tanks, and some environmental remediation. The plan called for the developer to be reimbursed by 2038 with another 5 years to the local revolving fund. That site's a little unique in that when the developer sold it, they split it into two. So we have the discount tire that was built on the front parcel, but the back parcel still hasn't been developed. So if you look at the brownfield plan right now, they're a little lagging behind on the capture that they were expecting because that back half of the lot hasn't been developed. One of the important things to know, and not to get into the weeds, but one of the fun things I get to do is administer these plans after they're put into place, which is a lot of work, but it's basically watching when are they paying their taxes, and then working with the township treasurer and township assessor to make sure that the money is flowing to the right places, right? Because it comes back to the brownfield authority to reimburse the developer instead of going to you, instead of going to the county, instead of going to the school sinking fund, etc. In this case, we have the back lot that your treasurer maybe knows has been delinquent. for a couple of years. So just so you know, when that happens, I don't reimburse the developer until the taxes are paid. And I just want to let you know kind of some of that background work that happens, and we don't ever reimburse the developer until those taxes are paid. So it's really, that reimbursement back to them is contingent on the development happening, one, and then two, the taxes actually getting paid.
good news on that front. It sounds like a credible purchaser has made some steps towards acquiring that.
Wonderful. That's
So-
very good news.
And I would guess that if that's actually true, it'll go pretty quick.
It's quite a bit actually of spreadsheet gymnastics when the taxes don't get paid on time for me and trying to figure out these projects. So that would be wonderful if that happened. So those are the two plans that you've approved to date. So in order for a site to be eligible to use these incentives, it has to qualify as a brownfield. And for many, many years, the definition in the state of Michigan for brownfield was those first 6 bullets. It could be blighted, so any blighted structure can be a brownfield site. It could be functionally obsolete, so no longer can be used for its original intended purpose. It could be contaminated, and I'm 99% sure that's how we qualified the Northcrest site, was contamination. Barrel and beam, I think we determined that one was functionally obsolete. So just to give you an idea of where projects fall. Property that's owned or under the control of a county land bank, so a lot of your tax foreclosed properties, other properties that come into our possession are automatically eligible for brownfield incentives. A historic resource, that's kind of a newish one. So we've got a historic property in a downtown, doesn't really have anything wrong with it, but just the simple fact that it's historic could render it eligible for brownfield incentives. Any properties adjacent or contiguous to any of the above can be lumped in and made eligible. And then the latest and greatest, housing property. What does that mean? It's kind of a foreign concept in the brownfield world, but it's really giving us an opportunity to incentivize housing development in a unique way. And this says, Jeff, you were gonna take over. And I want to introduce first, Jeff Hawkins is with Fishbeck, and Fishbeck is the County Brownfield Authority's environmental consultant. So I've been working with Jeff for 14 years, something like that, and he's way smarter than me at this stuff. So you're, like I said, you're gonna learn a lot more from him than me.
I give Ann more credit than that. She's knows this stuff inside and out too. Thanks, Ann. So, yeah, housing property, and we kind of, in most people's mind, when they look at brownfield type sites, they think of these contaminated, vacant, blighted, ugly type sites. Doesn't have to be that, obviously. It can be housing property, literally, and the definition of that is that really one or more units of residential housing that can be constructed, rehabbed, or otherwise designed to be a dwelling. And one or more residential housing that could be part of a mixed-use project as well. So that opens the door significantly. And I think it's important to kind of look back a little bit at maybe at a 30,000-foot level here on this whole concept, is that everybody is talking about this being a housing crisis in this state as well as other parts of the country. And I think the issue here is that they're trying to look for all these different tools that potentially can play a role in helping stimulate creating some of the housing that is needed in various communities and so forth. So, demonstrated housing need, that's one element of being able to use this tool. And there's several different ways really of demonstrating that housing need. Possibly a regional or local housing plan that talks about the housing that's needed. There is a statewide housing plan that's been created. That housing plan should probably be adopted or affirmed by the local municipality prior to us working with the Michigan State Housing Development Authority. We'll get into that a little bit. Master plans, perhaps, that you might have that are specific to discussing the housing aspect of things. Sometimes master plans, when you read them, they don't have the level of detail in it with respect to what type of housing details or things that you might need in your community. So sometimes those don't necessarily work. And added this to the slide, which is very important. Marquette County recently completed their housing target market analysis, and that should satisfy the requirement with respect to showing that housing need in this area, and that could be referenced.
Which you all invested in. You contributed to that study, so thank you.
So is there then a step for this board to formally accept the findings of that, or how does that work?
I actually was just thinking about asking you that question myself. If you're doing a brownfield plan to Mishta, do you have to formally approve of or adopt a plan like that, or?
They do state, I mean, if you look at this slide, it says housing plan should be adopted by or affirmed by the local municipality prior to Mishta's involvement. I would suggest it. I think it would make it cleaner and easier and demonstrate, that you're pursuing a project in your community and you support it. So I would say probably yes.
You could potentially even probably do that in the same resolution that you approved of brownfield
Absolutely.
plans, something like that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about the brownfield plan itself, which Ann talked about, but also as part of that, we can look at capturing local and school taxes. In order for us to go to the school tax side of things, we're going to have to go to the Michigan State Housing Development Authority through what's called an Act 381 work plan, and I believe we touched on that in a little bit. But just to clear that up a little bit. So there is some state involvement when it comes to the state taxes we talk about. School being school operating, so your 18 mills, and your state education tax, your 6 mills. Those are the two that we talk about as being the state or school taxes that could be captured that typically require approval through a state organization. So we have sites that are brownfield sites. We know how we classify them. They could be either contaminated, they could be blighted, functionally obsolete, and so forth. And so now we're going to look at putting a brownfield plan together. What can we potentially reimburse with that tax increment that Ann talked about? And you can look at this. There's a whole broad list of things. I always kind of like to refer to these as being the redevelopment expenses. What are the things that are causing this site to be a brownfield that we're trying to overcome that you normally wouldn't necessarily have to overcome on a greenfield site that may not have some of these other conditions? And right now, when it comes to brownfield plans, like I said, brownfield plans are approved at the local level. The school tax piece or these Act 381 work plans are typically approved at the state level. And so we really throw these eligible activities into 3 main buckets. First one being EGLE, Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Those are typically the environmental type things that you would think about. The due diligence work that's needed, baseline environmental assessments, removal of tanks, cleaning up contaminated soil, those types of things. Demolition, if it's required as part of a cleanup, as well as infrastructure improvements that landfill facilities actually is another one. The other category, so we have EGLE, the other one would be the Michigan Strategic Fund, which is pretty much implemented by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And that typically is what I call for as non-environmental type activities. So some of them are similar, like demolition, but that would be typically demolition on a site that isn't necessarily demolition because you have to get to contamination beneath it. It's just for the sake of demolition, it's got to come down. Site preparation is another one. And site preparation it's a really long list of things that you typically probably would think of on a normal construction site. So land balancing, staking, temporary roads, sometimes fill activities and so forth. But the unfortunate thing for Marquette Township is that you can only do it in the core communities, the site preparation activities, or in association with a land bank. So there's 148 core communities in the state of Michigan, and Marquette Township isn't one. In Marquette County, the only ones we have is the city of Marquette and Ishpeming. City of Ishpeming. Those are the only 2 core communities you have in Marquette County. So we can't use this potentially to support a project unless we get in the land bank and work with them. That's probably for another conversation. Public infrastructure is another one of those non-environmental activities that potentially could be eligible. And again, only in a core community or in association with a land bank. So public infrastructure typically is interpreted by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or MEDC, as typical public infrastructure that's required in the public right-of-way. So it could be roads, it could be sidewalks, it could be lighting, it could be sewer, it could be water, it could be sewer and water mains, coming up to a development, but typically it has to be in what's considered public right of way. And then the third bucket that we're talking about here is the new bucket, and that new bucket is the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MISTA. And as we indicated, that now housing property is an eligible site, that we can do eligible activities. The neat thing about it is that under the MISTA type activities, which we're going to discuss later, again, we can do that, all the things that we've already talked about, including infrastructure and site preparation. And it doesn't have to be in a core community if the housing development piece is part of it. So that opens the door quite a bit.
So this is where it ties into the developer then.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and then there's some other things at the bottom of that list. Preparation of the brownfield plans and the work plans are all eligible costs that can be reimbursed. Even some of the things Ann talked about with respect to having to manage these things once they're in place, that brownfield plan implementation and so forth, those are eligible costs, as well as administrative costs for the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, because it takes time and effort to do that type of thing. I'm trying to look at my notes up here. Look at 250. Oh, Act 381 work plans for school tax increment revenue. There's also some approvals designated reviewing agency that we have. That's basically what that line means. The reviewing agency has the asterisk. That's there. And then also just another one I'd like to throw out there that was a change this summer to the act is that we can do up to $250,000 as an eligible cost for asbestos, lead, mold, hazardous materials, and demolition on a site. And we can do that, capture local and school taxes without any work plan approvals. So it kind of streamlines the process on certain types of projects.
What school taxes?
School taxes, school operating, which would be the 18 mills,
Okay.
and the state education tax, which is the 6 mills.
How about the voted?
No voted.
Okay.
Yeah, or debt. Well,
Yeah,
voted,
we-
yes. Sorry,
Debt,
debt
no.
millage, no.
Okay.
But sinking fund, yes,
Sinking
Okay.
fund,
that's considered a local.
that's considered a local tax. Thank you, sorry. Let's see.
But they would still be would be still capturing their pre-TIF rates.
Correct.
Right, and it should be noted on the school tax increment, or the school taxes, if they're captured in a brownfield plan, the school districts are not penalized for that, they're made whole. That's why the state's involved. They see it as a state investment that they're making a decision because they have to backfill those dollars that aren't captured, or that are captured and given to the developer or the eligible costs. So that's why they get involved in that process. Whereas the other millages are local millages, and that's really where your role comes in, and the county's role comes in to approving those. So tax increment financing, still talking about that, with the new housing TIF can be used in a community with that identified housing need that we talked about. There was means by which we can demonstrate that housing need to reimburse a developer for all the things that we just talked about, the environmental costs, the infrastructure, and the site preparation, and the demolition. Let's just talk about that a little bit. Because typically, I think there's a word I left off purposefully under that, infrastructure. Remember, on the other non-environmental type activities where MEDC is involved in reviewing certain things, so it's public infrastructure. MISHA is interpreting it much broader from an infrastructure perspective to include pretty much any infrastructure that's involved in a housing development project. So again, road, sewer, so forth. But it could be that maybe the public infrastructure stops at the entrance to the development, but they still need roads and sewer and water extensions into there that might be privately held or in a private right of way. Those could be eligible expenses as well. So it opens the door. Sewer and water connections potentially could be an eligible cost. So it could potentially help make these developments happen where we need the housing. And then from another look at things, because of the cost of construction and all the things that are going on with respect to trying to get housing and so forth, we can also look at potentially paying for, with these tax increment dollars based on the investment made, rental rehabs, We can look at temporary household relocation for certain income qualified households. We can use those dollars for acquiring blighted or obsolete rental units to rehab them, as well as looking at a construction financing gap for homes for income qualified households. And when we talk about income qualified households, that's less than or equal to 120% of your area median income. And we've got some examples that we're going to talk about that kind of give you a better sense of what does that mean. But you can see this is a pretty robust program from a standpoint of opening the door significantly with respect to trying to help offset some of the costs related to getting housing starts and things going. It's not the silver solution, but it's a solution, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's see, I gotta see, Ian, you're gonna be jumping back in here now. So we talked, previous slide, we talked about these income qualified households and some of these eligible activities, especially the construction financing gap and so forth. We're calling that that subsidy that we're talking about for income qualified households as a housing subsidy calculation. And so we look at it in multiple ways. One of them for rental type things, it could be a potential rental loss for a multifamily type development, or it could be for single family potential development loss. And you calculate, there's some formulas we have to use and so forth to come up with what these potential rental losses are, potential development losses are. We have tables that MSHDA has provided with respect to the area median incomes, with respect to potential rents that are countywide, and we can calculate what's called a total housing subsidy. That total housing subsidy potentially represents that financing gap between what it's going to cost to build these or rehab these rental units and or build these single family homes. And I mean, we'll get into it a little bit more, but we're finding that you can build a house and you may not be able to get the bank to appraise it at the level that you had to pay to build it. And so there is a gap there. So whoever builds that property doesn't necessarily want to lose money on the deal, obviously, or else they're not going to build it. So we got to find a way in which we can try to recoup those costs. That's where that total housing subsidy comes into play. We can use that tax increment based on the investment that's made on the property to potentially reimburse for this total housing subsidy, as well as all these other things we just talked about. And as you can imagine, it all depends on what the investment is, what the taxes that are going to be generated, the time that this is going to take, all the eligible costs, and we model all these things to try to figure out, is this the best solution? Does it make sense financially? Does it work? But then, like I said, these other eligible activities for rehab, site prep, infrastructure, relocation expenses, all those can be thrown into this brownfield plan in addition to a total housing subsidy. We're actually finding on some of our models that we're putting together on these projects that we're doing across the state that if you do the total housing subsidy calculation, it is a very generous calculation from MSHDA's formula and things that we use. It tends to take all of the increment that's generated from the project to the point that you can't do pay for some of these other eligible costs. And so there's some balancing acts there that we're working on, and stay tuned as we work through these things. The other thing that's important to note is that, as these tools are great, these tools are useful, but there's a cost to that, from a standpoint of putting them together as well as managing them going forward. Because if these plans go out for 10, 15, 20 years, it takes time to do that annually, to look at your taxes that are captured, millage changes, values that are changing, and so forth. So they've also put in there an allowable cost up to $50,000 to monitor these things, including the income on these income qualified households. Because if you're going to offer this total housing subsidy for these properties or these income qualified households, you got to determine that they're still an income qualified household. So you got to look at that and verify that information. I'm still on. So, a couple things to think about here. 100% of the site preparation infrastructure costs are likely eligible if a portion of the development includes units that are below 120% of the area median income. So what does that mean? So you may find that a developer is proposing to put a housing development in play, but they want to mix that development to include market rate type housing as well as potentially housing for people that qualify for that income qualified household, that 120% of the area median income or less. So if a component, it could be a small component perhaps of an overall development is going to include housing for those income qualified households, MISHDA is allowing us to capture TIF to pay for the entire amount of infrastructure and site prep and so forth related to that development as an eligible cost. So it's not going to be that just the infrastructure or site prep activities that serve those households. Now, the total housing subsidy is a different story. That total housing subsidy would only apply for those homes that are putting income qualified households in them. But all fundamental physical development activities, and I have that in quote that comes out of the statute. So when you look at that, it could be water, sewer connections, sidewalks, driveways, development drives, parking areas, structures, green build features, solar panels and EV charging stations, infrastructure, site prep activities are eligible regardless if they are public or in the right of way or privately owned or in a core community. So it can be done anywhere. And then we can also use this tool potentially to help pay for debt service on any bonds or cost gap coverage, because a lot of these developments, obviously they're going to have to get funding up front. This is, keep in mind that a brownfield plan is reimbursement performance based. If they don't build it, taxes aren't going up. And if they don't incur the eligible costs, there's nothing to reimburse. So it is very much, it's based on the investment that's made, and it's based on doing what they say they're going to do and paying their taxes. So it's great on paper, but it really means meaningless unless they do what they say they're going to do. So, okay, come on, there we go. This is something that Ann already touched on a little bit with respect to, what's the process and so forth. So a brownfield plan could be approved locally for the local taxes only. Now keep in mind, in Marquette County particularly, we've used the Marquette County's Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and in that case, if it's a county-wide authority, the county itself cannot approve a brownfield plan unless the local unit of government where that project is occurring concurs with the terms of the plan by resolution. So you guys have to approve it before the County Board of Commissioners can hold their public hearing and adopt that brownfield plan. If you guys say no, that's as far as it goes. But you can approve a plan with just local taxes if you wanted to and not pursue the school taxes. And we'll talk on that a little bit, primarily related actually to the next statement. Primarily because if you think about it a little bit, so if we're talking about the school taxes, we discussed the 18 mills, school operating, 6 mills, the state education tax. So in a brownfield plan, we can capture of those 6 mills of the state education tax, we can capture only 3 of them. Excuse me, we capture all 6. 3 of them are used to support the project. The other 3 of those 6 go to the state's Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. So we have to capture all 6, but we only get to use half of them. So if someone comes to you to do a brownfield plan, and they're going to put a whole development that's single family, or a single family development, and all of those homes are going to be principal resident exempted, that basically says, well, we can't capture the 18 mills because they don't pay it. So that leaves us with 3 mills potentially of the remaining state education tax. So the question is it worth, based on the size of the project, to go to the state for their approval for those 3 mills? That's the question sometimes that's asked. So that may be a situation where you would only do a local only plan to support the project. But those are some things that we always have to look at from that standpoint. But then anything from a checks and balance perspective, you know, the township or the city or whoever's doing the project has to weigh in on whether or not they want to support that project. So again, state taxes available, 3 mills that we can capture for a project, 21 mills for the non-PRE. Again, we talked about Michigan's being very generous with respect to its infrastructure and its gap costs. And you gotta have this brownfield authority, you gotta have a brownfield authority at either the county level or local level to approve it. Projects must have a public benefit, meaning that, you know, you support, public benefit really is the housing need for the community. And typically though, there's gonna be a required development reimbursement agreement that's usually gonna be between the brownfield authority and the developer. And that development reimbursement agreement is gonna stipulate pricing, income monitoring, and duration for the subsidized residential units. So that agreement is really gonna be the rules of the road with respect to what they're gonna build, how they're gonna build it, and not necessarily how they're gonna build it, but what they're gonna build, which units are gonna be income qualified and so forth. So rental properties probably gonna have their price and household income monitored through the duration of the tax capture. For sale housing is monitored, the price and household income is monitored through the first sale. So that would be something we would look at. Once they sell a property, it's hard to control that.
Can I backtrack real quick on that
Sure.
last point?
Sure.
At the joint committee meeting up in Hope Hancock, one of the questions was asked about the deed restriction and who gets to decide what limitations are put on that property. I believe the answer is that would be up to the local council and the developer to make that negotiation and put that in writing. But I don't know if you could add anything about, have you seen anything like that at the state level or any projects we've done?
Be honest with you, we're still waiting to get feedback from them as to what they're gonna wanna see, MISHDA meeting, from that standpoint.
Okay.
I'm being told that sometimes a deed restriction isn't necessarily needed, but if there is a development reimbursement agreement between the entities that wanna be involved in that development agreement, then it still has to be recorded in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
So, I wish I had a better answer for you, but
Yeah, that's,
I think there's more than one avenue to get to the same end result.
thank you.
Let's see. So in a nutshell, this is something it's been a while, but you've been experienced to it. Developer proposes a project, develops a plan. The county, or the township in this case, or the brownfield authority approves the plan, recommends approval by the board of commissioners subject to the township or the local municipality approving it. And then the brownfield authority and the state approved the work plan for the school aspect of things. And so the work plan may require MISHDA's environmental review, possibly Eagle has to be involved. Sometimes if we have a mixed development where we have environmental issues and we have the housing issues, we may have to get Eagle involved in those work plan reviews too. Currently, right now, there's always a discussion about, well, what does the developer get? What do their numbers mean when they're building these homes? What's their profit? What's their fees? And sometimes you get clarity on that, sometimes you don't. So that does need to be broken out. If we're going to the state typically is going to want to see a performance, and they're going to want to see what that really looks like. And currently, based on their conversations with other developers and so forth, they're looking at a combined 15% developer fee and profit combined. So it'll be interesting to see if that goes up or is modified or how it's going to be done, because developers, savvy developers, folks that do this work aren't going to do it for free. And you're up.
I was gonna mention too, before we start talking more about housing, the two plans that you have adopted here, that I went over earlier, are local only plans. I represent the county brownfield authority. As you know, the city of Marquette has their own city brownfield authority. Our county authority has only done local only plans. We've got about 10 plans outstanding right now. The reason for that is because prior to now, most of those plans, in order to get school taxes approved, the projects would have to be happening in a traditional downtown. And we don't do work in traditional downtowns because I'm doing work everywhere other than the city of Marquette, right? So with few exceptions, most of our plans have been local only plans. Most of the city of Marquette's plans have state capture in them. And it's important to think about that because anytime you can leverage that state money, it's better obviously for you to bring in that state money to that plan. Again, as Jeff mentioned with housing, that could be limited if it's principal residence exemption property or not. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah.
Just to clarify on that a little bit, that comment you made, that pretty much they've been local only. There are some situations.
I wasn't gonna get into that detail.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna say, if someone looked at a plan and they see some capture.
There's a little bit of school capture for some environmental activities.
There are some
Where you're going?
statutory things that do not require approval by the state. They've already been baked into the statute. Similar to what I just talked about with the $250,000 demolition thing. We don't have to go to the state for approval to capture school taxes.
Right.
Sorry, didn't mean to get into the
It's okay. It's okay. But he is right. So, some of the points on this slide. Why do we need this? Why did they adopt this? Why did they add housing to Brownfield? Well, we have a problem, right, with getting these units built at the right price point. And that's why this tool was developed. So there's a significant need for housing of all types, but as we know, especially in the affordable, attainable price range, right? There's too many people spending more than half of their income or rent on a mortgage. We know that too. Michigan's housing stock is very old. It's more economical for developers to build bigger houses than smaller houses, and it's more economical for them to do market rate housing developments than attainable housing developments. Michigan has a statewide housing plan that calls for 75,000 units in 5 years. Not sure how that's gonna happen. And Governor Whitmer's housing plan intends to invest nearly $1.4 billion to build and rehab nearly 10,000 homes. So we've got this new housing brownfield TIF that we're here talking about today. Residential housing exemption and attainable housing exemption. I don't know much about those two tools, and I didn't know if you intended to get into that or not. And then there's some old tools that you may recognize listed there as well. But you know, we hear everybody talking about the housing crisis, and this TIF, housing TIF was intended to be one tool to be able to help solve that crisis. So you heard Jeff talk about area median income, we call that AMI. Marquette County's median household income for a one-person household is $57,200. For a family of 4, it's $87,100. Most of the housing incentives that are aimed at what's called missing middle or attainable housing, whatever you hear it called, they're focusing on people in the 80 to 120% AMI range. So who are those people? That's a household, a one-person household of $45,760 at 80% to $68,640 for that one person. And I think it's the next slide that we did an adjustment, so I'll have you pay attention to the screen and not your handout.
Yes, the handouts were incorrect.
So who are we talking about? We're talking about people who have good paying jobs. For a single person, $68,000, a family of 4, $98,000. I'm sure all of you know people who fall into those income criteria. So when you hear folks talk about this is low income housing, when we're talking missing middle attainable housing, we're not talking about low income housing. That's in the 60% to 80% range, and maybe even lower than that. We're talking about these kind of numbers. These are first time home buyers, young families. It's my kid, right? It's maybe some of your children or grandchildren too. People with college debt, vocational education. They might be paying for childcare, and they fall into this category. So these are the kinds of families that we're talking about. And why do we need housing incentives? Well, because of how expensive it is to build houses these days, right? So the median sold price in Marquette County, Jeff pulled this up, so I'm gonna trust it's accurate, is $275,000.
It's Rocket Mortgage.
If you're a builder, I like that statement on there because it is totally true. If you're a builder, you can't make money right now building homes in this price range, right? And that is the dilemma that we have.
Hey, Ann, if you can go
Yeah,
back to that slide a little bit though. So on the right-hand side are just some quotes out of Grand Rapids. It may not be applicable necessarily here. But if you look at that $275,000 median sold price that's for built product. That's what's out on the market. And what they're saying is to build a 1,500 square foot home, at least in the GR area, you know, that they're looking at $450 or more per square foot, or it can go above that for luxury. But for this particular one, they said $295 square foot. That's $442,500. And down below they have one for $315. That's $472,000 for a 1,500 square foot home.
So I have a couple local examples from last year because the land bank is doing some infill construction on some of the sites that we own in the county. So I wanted to share these with you that we're not like making these numbers up. This is actually, I actually experienced this last year. So last year, 2023, we built a picture up the top is a picture of one of the homes we built last year in the city of Ishpeming. So a little bit of a lower market than what you might have here in Marquette Township. It was a modular construction home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath on a crawl space, so not even a full basement. It did include appliances. It cost us over, I have a plus sign there, I'll explain what that means, $260,000 to build that home. And we sold it for $2,099. So there was a $50,000 gap that was funded by Michigan's Missing Middle Program. It's a grant that we received to help bring that cost of that home down. The reason for the plus sign is we owned the land, so there was no fee for land. We got funding from the county board to construct these, so I had no interest or construction financing. And I didn't charge a lick of admin or any development fee. So that $260,000, if it were a private developer, probably would have been a much bigger number. Okay, 2024, as we're gearing up for 2 more homes this coming summer, we decided we wanted to do stick built and give that a shot. And we ended up finding a builder who's gonna do a 962 square foot stick built, only 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and not even on a crawl space, it's gonna be on a slab. Cost to construct is $304,000 because the Missing Middle Program requires us to do prevailing wage. It's $304,000 with prevailing wages. Without prevailing wage, it would have been $253,000. So you can see we're still kind of in that same price range, more or less, as last year. We're hoping we can list it at $224,000. And that would be an $80,000 gap. And again, we have grant funding right now that's funding that gap. That gap, again, as Jeff said, could be funded by a brownfield plan. We just happen to have a grant program that's funding it. So I wanted to give you kind of just a local example that those numbers are real. And we're experiencing it at a very small level with just onesie-twosie houses that we're building, but it's a real problem. Key thing to remember, I always try to point this out to boards and commissions when I talk with them, is no taxing jurisdiction will ever get less money than they're getting currently when they implement the brownfield plan, right? Because you continue to collect taxes on that site as it is today. You're incentivizing the development by giving up future tax revenue. And the theory is, without that incentive, you would never see that development. I always like to remind of that. So there are some potential challenges with tax increment financing. I think Jeff has touched on some of these already. So it is limited when it's principal residence exemption property, right? Because we might not be able to go after that school TIF. Financing construction with under a brownfield plan with TIF reimbursement could go out 30 years. It's a long time. It's a long time for a local unit of government to wait to see that tax revenue. It's a long time for a developer to wait to get reimbursed. So that's it's potentially a very long period of time. The affordability must be tied to the TIF capture duration. So for that full length of the plan, those units need to remain affordable or attainable, whatever word you want to use. Is the total housing subsidy reasonable? Could a brownfield plan absorb that $80,000 gap that I just showed you on the previous slide? It might not be a reasonable amount to absorb in a brownfield plan. And Jeff's got on here about scale. You know, if you're doing 2 houses, does it make sense to bring a brownfield plan to a local unit of government to adopt for just 2 houses, or do you need to look at larger projects? And again, local governments need to consider the cost of servicing. So there's a new neighborhood going in, you're gonna need to respond to that with your fire and EMS. You're going to, you're gonna have more people traveling on your roads, et cetera, et cetera. If you're having to wait 30 years to get a tax benefit from that neighborhood, that could potentially be a challenge for a local unit of government. So, we've thrown a lot at you. I don't know if we missed anything or that I glossed over. We are happy to answer questions. We wanted to come and give you this education because by and large, municipalities are gonna start hearing from developers who wanna use this tool. And so we wanted to make sure that we gave you an opportunity to understand it better. Again, we're still learning it. I don't know that MISHDA's approved a housing TIF plan yet. So it's definitely a work in progress, but that's kind of why we were here today, was to give you an opportunity to ask us questions and how it might relate to any projects coming up in the township.
And keep in mind where all of the housing pressure coming from the city is going. The city's mostly built out. We're aware of at least 2 potential residential developments in the township. There's actually one finishing up currently on Grove Street. We have Longyear, we have the Renovare project. There could be others waiting in the wings, we don't know. Who knows if any of them want to use this tool, but it's available to them if you're willing to consider it.
I've got a couple questions, Ann. Talking about the 2 projects, well, the one you did in Ishpeming, going back a few slides in the construction. The first one you said that was done in Ishpeming, you owned the land and you didn't charge an admin fee. What was the third thing?
No cost of financing,
Okay.
so we have our own funding.
So does that apply to the smaller stick-built one then too? Or is that is that why the price is different?
No, the price is different because it's stick-built 1. 2, because kind of an interesting nuance, but when it comes to prevailing wage, a modular house is built in a factory and it's considered a product, and prevailing wage doesn't apply. So, yeah, it's weird, but that is why the modulars are much easier to do through this particular program because of that prevailing wage requirement. But no, same situation. This one we're actually looking to build in Ishpeming Township, and it is on a site that we already own, and we will be using our own funding, so it's kind of in the same boat. We are hopeful that in Ishpeming Township we might be able to get that higher price point versus the city of Ishpeming. Yeah.
You have a good thought that TIF projects don't require prevailing wage.
No. The question is, do TIF projects require prevailing wage? No. The only reason that prevailing wage is required is MISHDA's missing middle program requires it. We also have a county, I don't know if your township has a policy though, but our county policy is anything over 50,000 is subject to prevailing wage.
No.
I'm not aware of one at the township level. Okay.
And if I may add, for the construction side on the 2024 project, it has been ongoing conversations with that builder to get him on board to stick with the program that we're trying to educate on. And without the land, without that without increased interest in construction loans and all the extra, Ann's not charging 10, 20 points on top of this to administer this, but those are the challenges that he has to go back to his sub trades to say, give me your best price, let's get this built. And those are the things that I think we're trying to assist with as we go. But for a large scale project, it's a totally different ballpark.
The problem I see is, listening to you on the TIF, I'm familiar with TIF back in the 90s, I was involved with all in township. But the last comment, you said local government needs to consider the cost of serving new houses. If you have a TIF, all of a sudden, our revenue is gonna be decreased, and yet we have to provide all those services. And that, is that
Well, your
correct?
revenue is not decreased, you're gonna continue, you've got a vacant parcel of land that has nothing on it, you're gonna continue to capture the taxes and get tax revenue on that vacant land. What you're not going to see if you adopt a brownfield plan is any increase from that development. So you're really, I kind of, the way I try to explain it to people is you're giving up that tax revenue in order to incentivize that development. And
Future
if you didn't
tax
do that,
revenue.
you'd never get the development, you'd continue collecting at that vacant.
It's a balancing act that you have to look at.
Absolutely, it's an investment, it's an absolute local
Yeah.
investment of your tax dollars to look 30 years down the road and reap the reward of that development.
I'm looking here, none of us are gonna be here in 30 years.
Believe me,
I might
I'm
be-
administering plans that I know I'll never see the end of them. I get really excited when one expires and I'm like, oh, I actually saw the end of this brownfield plan.
I think that's the biggest concern of mine is the cost of really new housing on anything, because we have to upfront a lot of this stuff to start with. For the number of years we're gonna get the refund back to pay it. It's really be a question for the board, whoever's sitting in the board at the time,
So
they wanna go that way.
let's just put that in a realistic perspective. And this is purely hypothetical, but realistically, potentially could happen. Renovari, from what we know of them, they do funding stacks, which very likely would include a residential TIF.
It will.
Okay, so $500,000 property to start. They've got to bake that into the cost of missing middle or affordable housing. How many units do you have to spread that across and still try to be able to build it affordably when you also have to extend utilities into the site? They're going to want a TIF in order to cover those costs, meaning the property that the township sells for $500,000, the revenue you're going to see for the duration of the TIF is what you sold the property for. Because it's not currently gathering taxes being township owned.
I understand
But
that.
that's probably the only way it gets built is with a residential TIF, given the current construction costs.
Yeah, I think the other thing to consider too is you're leveraging tax dollars that are being paid by the owners of those parcels in the future for an asset that you don't have currently. So you're getting streets, you're getting sidewalks, you're getting sewer, you're getting water, you're getting a whole host of things that are going to continue to contribute to your infrastructure, across the township.
Because it's not just your millage, it's the county's millage too.
Well, that's
So-
only in this case too, because we own the property.
But really, in any case, with any brownfield plan that this township board approves, you are sacrificing future millage of your own, but you're also taking in county millage that you would never see, right? And potentially state millage that you would never see to improve property in your township.
So what is the township's millage here?
Very affordable.
Administratively under 5. Okay, and then we've got
They've got quite a few extra
Roads.
roads, so
So we've got Act 33, we've
I would
got a
be- I would
roads
be
village.
guessing.
fire.
I looked at it the other day, but I would be guessing at what
It's
it's
about,
at,
it's under 9, I think.
even with the extra voted.
Yeah, 'cause
So
they're
you're
small.
probably looking at or you're gonna be drawing in more taxes that are gonna stay in the township than what you're giving up.
This
So
is-
you're leveraging other taxes that normally would go to other taxing jurisdictions outside your jurisdiction.
So you're using those other tax revenues to pay off the TIF debt quicker.
And there's the whole concept of how bad do you want houses? How bad do you wanna see these housing units built so that people can live in your community and work for your employers and the kids are in the schools? I mean, there's that whole non-tax taxation side of it too.
And every project has to be considered separately from past.
Based on its own merits.
Yeah, and it stands on its own. If you've done anything today, I think you've introduced us to help is available if we're interested in seeking these other options. I think that's great.
Specifically, if the developer wants to,
Yeah,
they would be proposing it to us.
And I thank you for that.
So how does this tie in with the administrative part of it? Does the TIF flow through the development presentation with the planning commission, or is this all board driven?
It's all board, it's
Okay.
separate, yeah.
Okay.
So basically, if one of these two groups wants to do a brownfield plan for housing, they're gonna bring it to our brownfield authority, which is a county brownfield authority. I'm trying to think if we have a township, who's our township representative? Do we have a township representative?
Steve and Amelia
No,
on
it's
the
Kristen
board?
Thornton.
Okay, on the authority,
Yeah.
I mean.
Anyway, there is township representation on our brownfield authority for what that's worth, but, so they would bring it to us. We would say yay or nay, whether we support it. My next step would be to present it to you. Because as Jeff said, if you don't support it in your jurisdiction, it dies. So on some of these, I might come to you twice, right? Like I might come to you just to talk about the project, and a lot of them I've already been having conversations with John and your staff to make sure everybody understands what, what's happening, and I'm not just showing up at a board meeting and saying, hey, I want you to approve this 30-page document. That has a really lot of small numbers on it, by the way. But yeah, so then I would bring it to you. If you concur with the plan, then it goes to the County Board of Commissioners. There's a public hearing held at that point in time. And then if the county board approves it, it's adopted. And then all the fun afterward as far as administration, that's on me. It's a matter of, I watch for them to pay their taxes. I'm communicating with the folks here to find out if they've paid them, and then I'm reimbursing them. And I should say before that, they're submitting all their eligible expenses to me. I'm screening them, working with Jeff to make sure they fit what the plan said. Compile all those costs, and then when they start paying taxes, they get reimbursed.
but it sounds like we as a board have to do a cost analysis at this point in time to see what we think is the best for the township to move forward on a project like this and that.
In terms of, whether it's worth it for the public services that you'll need to provide, you mean?
Anything, it's total cost of analysis of everything all the way down the line.
Well, it depends on how big the project is too. If you have a huge one and we know that our services are gonna be stretched, that would come into play. It depends, if you're, what you said before, 1 or 2 is not gonna be cost effective for a developer. So what's that bottom line? Is it like 10 units or 20 or there isn't one? Okay, that's
Do
okay.
they own the property? Are the utilities already there?
True,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
of these factors.
I mean, if you think about it from a standpoint of like, when you talk about what a project looks like, if it's 1 or 2 single-family homes, probably not. If it's going to be one project that's 40 units, yeah, probably that makes sense because it's going to come online fairly quickly and it involves a much larger investment that's going to generate that tax increment. So it is scalable, but you definitely need to look at it to see if it's worth the effort.
Somebody had said to me, because we're doing all the, the one or 2, 3 or 4 a year of these houses, well, why don't you do brownfield plans on those? And I'm thinking, like, I've done this 10 times or more to go through that process for 1 or 2 homes, and some of them are in multiple jurisdictions, which we as a land bank can do it that way, but I'm gonna go to 2 different township boards and convince them to do a brownfield plan for 2 houses. It's a lot of work, so it needs to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it from a standpoint, really what this tool is made for, I think, is to help offset the cost of putting in the infrastructure that's needed to allow a housing component to be built. If it's a single lot here, a single lot there, your eligible costs are probably limited. I mean, you think about it from a standpoint of some of the houses that we're talking about, what are their annual taxes, that increment that we can capture? 2,500, $3,000 a year, maybe. And so if you look at that, even if you were to run a brownfield plan to its full extent to 30 years, you're only looking at $90,000. So I mean, it's very limited from a standpoint of what those eligible costs are. Whereas if you scale it and you have a $20 million project to build 40 units or something along those lines, that makes a bigger difference likely from what that value is going to be on that property, what you can leverage from the standpoint of tax increment.
So don't we have a benefit then with the amount of commercial business that we have as far as not losing the school taxes? How does that play into even the length of the TIF? Doesn't
The
that
TIF
help?
doesn't apply to those
Because-
properties.
Yeah, certainly if you can capture that school TIF, your brownfield plan's gonna be shorter, right? Because there's more tax increment to capture. If it's rental properties, if it's a multi-unit rental, you're gonna have an opportunity to capture school TIF on that. If it's a commercial property, you're gonna have an opportunity to go after that school TIF.
I
But if
see.
it's a principal residence exemption
Okay.
development mainly, now if they're second homes, if it's on a lake and it's, then you would have that opportunity. But if they're gonna be mainly owner occupied, there's not gonna be a lot of school TIF to capture.
So this is not, it's tax increment similar to a DDA, but it's not like a DDA, just from a standpoint, it's parcel by parcel where the projects
Yeah.
are specific. So
Okay.
it's not gonna impact any of the other parcels in your township.
Right.
It's just the parcels that are generating the new taxes, and those are the ones that we focus on and capture.
So if Renovare has a residential TIF, it would apply to the 5 acres that they're developing, not to all the properties around it.
Right. Yep.
Correct.
Same thing with Longyear. I mean, they've got a 240 unit PUD, right? If they did a residential TIF, it would apply to that development, not to any other properties around it.
Correct.
Now,
Lots of information to think about.
So we might be seeing these, you don't know.
Oh,
I don't care.
Sounds like we will.
Okay.
well, there's other factors at the lunch.
Okay.
Okay.
We wrap
Well,
up.
Any-
I remember a few years ago when the land bank built its first home in Ishpeming, you had some numbers that you would run, and this was before costs really started escalating. And if I remember correctly, you were basically looking at building a home with a basement or a garage.
yes.
Now it's the only thing you get is a crawl space,
Mhm.
right? So you've already given up a full basement or a garage just to get something into the missing middle category.
Yes. Other than missing middle did increase our award, and they're now getting us the 80,000 instead of 50, which helps. So we're kind of toying around with if we do a modular home. Next summer we're planning on doing a one stick built, but we're also doing a modular, and we're toying around with the idea if we do that second modular, do we now have enough money to throw a garage up with it? We have to. And Tony will be running those numbers and seeing. We have a larger lot where the church was torn down. That a garage would fit very nicely there. And yeah, how do you buy a house without any storage? Yeah, it's tough.
I think the other thing with, it's kind of a perfect storm with respect to residential building and all building, frankly, for that matter. But, some of these projects, even the larger ones that have, capacity to build more homes and so forth, sometimes it's not the construction of the overall project is not necessarily limited by the ability to fund it. We're finding it sometimes limited by the number of trades there are to hang drywall and do plumbing, do electrical work and all that kind of
That's
stuff.
100% the case in Marquette County currently.
And so that's on top of all the other price pressures that we're getting. I just had a individual I met with from the Sioux that indicated he got quoted $500 a square foot to build a residential unit.
I mean, I am convinced, regardless of how anybody feels about TIF or these tools or the incentives, I am convinced that we will not see any attainable housing without some kind of incentive. It just won't happen.
One of the proposals Renovari made in the beginning, and I don't know if they're still going that direction, was to add a rental component, or they were considering it, or we suggested it, I don't remember. So how does the rental side fit into it? We've only got like 10 minutes before our meeting starts, but if that's a long explanation, then don't bother. But does
No, I mean, I guess
doesn't
from,
hurt it or
and
help
you
it?
can weigh in, I mean, from my perspective, the rental component actually, well, one, the TMA shows we need them.
Right.
Right, and when you all, get to see that report, you will see that, we need rental. I think that you gain the benefit of being able to capture that school TIF in a brownfield plan situation when it's a rental property
Yeah, I'd still
versus the
apply.
owner
It's
occupied.
non-PRE, right?
Yeah.
Right,
And so that's where you got, remember we talked about the total housing subsidies that you can reimburse for? So in a rental situation, it'll be total rental loss. So similar to what the cost is to build these things, they're gonna, if they were to use straight up numbers on what it costs to build that thing, the rents would be far exceeding the income qualified households. And so there's a gap in that total rental loss, which equates to a total housing subsidy. Could it be another means by which you can offset using the tax increment through brownfield?
Okay.
yeah,
So you
so
can-
in that case, it's letting you use the brownfield plan to reduce the rents to make it more affordable to live in that complex.
And in that situation too, if it's gonna be rentals, if they're gonna build a building with multiple rentals in it, your tax capture is gonna occur probably quicker in that scenario than single family, just because you're not gonna build 10 units and then finish the building later and add another 10 units. You're gonna build the entire building envelope and build out the units at the same time.
Wow, that's great. Good information, especially if we expect to see some of this in the next year coming at us. At least
Hopefully
it'll
it
make
will.
more sense.
Thank you.
You might have to come back and refresh it though. You
That's okay.
never know.
We will.
A lot of
Do you want me to
information.
bring that one back up, or?
We can. Yeah, this is just a little summary on the new changes to Act 381 that talks about the housing projects.
Thank you.
You can look at if you'd like. Kind of summarizes some of the things we talked about.
I need some paper clips here.
It cooperates.
Okay, why don't we, I haven't seen anybody come in yet.
They're back there.
Are they?
Can I get my stick too?
Oh, yeah.
You want to put that one back? That's mine. Should we put this back?
Sure.
Just slides out. I think it's magnetic.
So we can adjourn at 5:20.
Yeah.
Thanks again, we appreciate all of you
Hopefully
coming.
it was helpful and
Yeah.
come back anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome, guys.
Want to take a break?
Yes.
Yeah.
What else is there? You can have a stash.
Remember,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
thunder and lightning.
Yeah.
Should I say lightning and thunder? You don't want to meet. Okay. Nice face.
That sounds good. The biggest thing is the cost analysis to start with.
Wow.
You know, it's,
Well, we can buy heat treated firewood. Heat treated firewood. There's no bugs in it. Cross contaminate trees. You guys get paid by the hour or you're on flat salary?
It's coming out of your salary.
I think it's, no, certainly not by the hour.
No, I know that. I know that.
Randy thinks it is,
What's that?
by the hour.
Yeah,
He makes 52 cents an hour.
yeah.
I'm not too far behind him.
No?
I'm nowhere near him, I'll tell you that.
Especially this last month, eh?
Okay.
Let me get something to eat.
Are we serving dinner tonight?
Yeah, over there.
Did you put your order in?
Ooh. Oh, I was just being sarcastic.
There's sandwiches there for you.
Oh, okay. What about the camera?
Well,
There's something to eat over
if
there.
there's any leftovers.
Okay.
You're looking good.
I actually took a nap on the job.
John was a little under the weather.
Well, I was under the weather big time. I had walking pneumonia.
That's pretty impressive.
Well, no, it was not impressive, no.
But you're walking now, so I assume.
Yeah, I'm walking now. How good I am, but I'm walking.
You're getting there, hey?
I'm getting there.
Right. I hate to say anything, because I respect it. I understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. However, we have to do it correctly. And I do like that we have a nice deputy here right now too, that would be able to sit on Commerce Drive here and watch for those doubles that are going by really fast and hold into this. They're probably doing 50. Which is legal. It's a full overspend. I mean, 45.
Oh, did the doctor give you an okay today?
Everything was good. Everything was good. No problems. No problems. All right.
John, or Carl, your food over there.
Now that I'm working right there, I do. They're not even going as fast there. If they get that mean they are.
I guess north was bad too. And it'll in there. They don't know what they have to do to get it even slow down that area.
Not repair the road. Well, it doesn't help here though. Last spring we had a traffic, so we were
Yeah.
Rich, or 40.
With that 45
45. Yeah.
The locations.
Speed limit.
Right. Like 180.
That's coming back. That's not wrong. End up with a lot of dead people on that corner. It is what it is.
Good.
Good. Got to see Jay the other day. He seems like he's.
Yeah, daily about.
Yeah. So he goes up there last night.
Oh, not that recent.
He's got a meeting with the lip, and his wrist was killing him. He doesn't remember if they have to do it.
Oh.
So Keith's been over at the hospital with him all day today, running tests, trying to figure out what's wrong with him. He doesn't recall a thing. You know, they're suspecting maybe that, well, most likely he fell. But if he fell, the wrist thing, the arm thing didn't go off, didn't notify anybody. And then, yeah, I don't know. They're thinking, well, maybe he had a seizure, he hit himself. Wow, man, you really have to sneeze so hard that, you know, because you know his wrist is swelling. It doesn't make any sense, but now they're threatening, because he has no recall of it happening, they're threatening him not to be able to drive. So, yeah, it's a fiasco, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Or maybe that will suddenly trigger some recall.
Yeah.
Food tonight.
Yeah, thanks.
So you can have a little bit of chow on it anyway.
I wondered why he was here.
Trying to pay behind my back, John? I come for the food, that's all.
The story I heard from someone who worked with Peter White.
You got two, oh, you brought one for me.
Nope.
Yeah.
You want one, go get your own.
But then I heard there was two stories. Like someone
I
came
heard
in
you
from a
talking about
ballot,
me
but
on my
decided
back.
not to take it
My back was turned.
because it would be recorded online. She didn't want someone to find out which party she
You don't like me.
Well, as far as I know, it's just in our database, and we're not recording
Anything
it.
that your wife doesn't cook for you.
We're not well, I don't, it goes to the state database, but they do it like anything.
Well, that's why this woman didn't vote, because she was afraid that somebody would find out who she voted for.
I will find out from the county clerk from you if they do that.
Is there more water out in the refrigerator?
Yeah.
Carl?
Want me to get you one?
Yeah, you want water, Carl?
I'm good.
You going on any extended vacations in the next 2 weeks?
No.
Hi there.
Certify the record from the ZBA appeal.
Sorry, we've been here since 4 o'clock.
And that line's on you.
Long
I have to
day.
figure out what that means.
Well, the question I have is, so I got the minutes and I got your suggestions. Do you want me to change it or do you want, I mean, they're not super
Yeah.
big suggestions. And then John will sign them and they'll be, you want me to keep
Well,
draft?
actually, how does that work? Do they just stay not signed until they get approved, or how does that typically work?
Well, they can be a draft and be signed.
Okay, 'cause I wasn't sure.
But I don't usually post anything in draft form. So
Understood.
as far as they know, it's still a draft. But
Sorry we ran.
what I'll do,
And then what's the best way?
You did.
I'm going to submit a copy of the YouTube video.
oh, I can download
What did I pay
it.
you for?
Put it on a jump drive or
Yeah.
something, or?
Yeah.
Did you see him
And
in
then
your
what we'll have to do is certify that it's a true, complete, and authentic copy of the proceedings.
I have the copy from in the computer. It's the regular file, so, I mean,
I think that
it
was
should be
good.
authentic because that's what's
really good.
online.
You know, we may not, I think we know who to go to if we need help.
Absolutely, yeah.
Go ahead, sit down.
So Tom will be here on the 20th for the tax report for the library.
Go ahead.
We'll try and email you so you remember to get it on
Okay,
the agenda.
that'll be perfect, thank you. And there's no mail on it?
All right.
So nice to look up.
I mean, I just,
I didn't know it was gonna take so long.
You're lucky he didn't go all the way down to the floor.
Take another bite.
Well, if they're eating our sandwiches, I'll go get a second.
I know better than not even
I was trying to be.
come back and sit down after we've gone a while.
You got my message, hey?
I did. Thank you.
Did you find out about getting photocopies of that? How you doing?
that's a good question.
I'm gonna tell my wife what you're saying about her cooking.
That'd be great.
It's a good thing.
For the next 30 years, you weren't here for the last
The only thing you eat.
30 years. I said, I might stay here. Oh, and you said me too.
Well, I guess
We
I
can
gotta
wait,
go
we
get
can
my,
wait
I
till
can look at it.
30 for
I
everything.
don't have my packet.
Cabbage,
I thought we had more time.
chicken paprika.
Mmm.
I'm afraid to get up, I figure I'm gonna end up to the wall.
Yeah.
How come you don't ever bring a plate over for me?
I'll
Huh?
bring it to the library, I'm there now.
Poor old man starving to death.
No.
Yeah, looks like they're going to wasting away.
All right.
Oh, Miles, how are you? This is thunder and this is lightning.
Yeah.
You know Andrea, all right?
I'm just trying to brush off all these hairs from these women.
No, from my animals.
You still hybrids on.
Hi there, sorry to interrupt you.
Does he
Did you get
still
the
respect you?
link for the presentation okay? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure, I did bring a backup of it if, perfect.
We're good.
You're so
I
good.
guarantee you right now, she's sitting home crying.
Yeah, she's pissed because you're gone.
Which one is that now?
My little dog, my little puppy, my 14-year-old puppy.
I hate being
So you get rid of them, you can't go anywhere.
Well, I won't have another one. She's a lot more company than John is, so.
I wonder if this will print to the printer if I'm too far away.
Should.
You eat them? Oh. Yeah. You must have come from a big family. We missed you earlier tonight.
Only at work.
Hey Randy,
Yeah.
we missed you. I tried to volunteer to step in for you, but they didn't let me.
Okay.
John got it figured out.
I'd like everyone to note that only 2 of the TVs are still on. Yeah, this one's going through a software update, so we're struggling with that one right now. So I did as good as Randy could do.
You did just fine.
So if that. Have to use Jeff's presentation clip. Yours wasn't working. No. Well, and if it doesn't work, I can move it. Andrea can tell me to next slide.
I can do that.
If it don't work, but I think it should be okay.
I'm gonna work off my sandwich.
So Roger, would you like that on a jump drive or a CD? I can put it on a CD too.
It matters not which.
Just as though they have a copy. I can put
Probably a
it,
jump drive, actually, now that I say that.
okay, I'll get one, put it on there.
I guess I'm the only one not ready, hey?
They were, yep.
I'll read in between.
Keep you from talking much. We'll be eating.
Now you know how to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
I suppose John's ready back there. Okay. Are you recording too? Or when you're going to?
That's actually still going if you want to grab me that. Hope you didn't say anything too embarrassing because it's on tape.